Hi, thank you for coming in. I wanted to again appreciate your time here. Thank you for applying for the position. I want to introduce you to our current panel here. Go ahead, Nathan. We'll start with you.
Hey, I'm Nathan. I'm Director of Operations here.
I'm Ian. I'm the analyst around here.
Good morning. My name's Steven. I'm a cloud implementation specialist.
I'm Matthew. I'm the software developer on the team.
And once again, my name is John. I am your CEO, CFO, president, and our lead architect over our entire corporation. So I wanted to start off with getting to know you a little bit better. And oh, oh my, this is okay. You know what? I appreciate your time. Door's over there. What a loser. Oh, Nathan, what are we doing today?
We are doing something that I dread, despise, and generally hate.
It's called a skit.
You don't like bits?
If it was just a skit, hey, we April 1st, dude.
That was more than just
that
a
was
bit.
pretty impressive. I'm still impressed that we made it.
That
without
was
cracking.
Yeah.
That
One
was
take.
epic.
One take.
It's so well. No, okay, this is. I don't mind skits. It is the thing that I truly despise: interview questions.
Mm-hmm.
Hate them with a passion.
See, I love them. I get to talk about myself. It's great.
Which is why we're doing this. All right, so
And nobody's surprised at all.
quick ground rules, just to make this fairly clear. For the most part, we are going to, from the perspective we're coming at this from is either we're interviewing somebody or we're helping counsel, coach, teach, etc. somebody that we know as they prepare for an interview. Depending on the question, depending on who's talking, there may be some variations in that perspective. If anyone wants to volunteer to be interviewed, then you're more than welcome to. That will not be me.
I volunteer, Steven.
I volunteer him as tribute.
I don't wanna.
That's fine. If y'all want to ask me interview questions, I'll definitely take them. But I definitely want to be able to provide this more as hey, this is what I know has set me up for success in interviews. Because the one thing I may not have gotten a lot of the roles that I've applied for, but the one piece of feedback I always got was I interview quite well, and that comes from the perspective here of knowing your worth and knowing how to sell yourself to be able to get that job that you actually want. Because again, that interview, your resume is what gets your foot in the door, but what you say and how you hold yourself in that interview is what ultimately helps be that driving factor of, are you going to get this or not?
You mean it's not the nepotism and who you know?
I mean, that does play a factor, but
It's not how well you grease palms.
oh my goodness. Steven, we all know the only way you grease a palm is if you don't shower for 3 days.
Sometimes only 2.
Well, we were on the rails for longer than last episode.
Oh, boy, howdy. We don't have to talk about Linux for me to get going.
All right, so
You just tell me when
we'll
you want
just
to
kind of
pass some
start
time.
this in order of who's in the document to kind of keep this simple. Steven.
Yeah, no, I think this works because mine's going to be fairly straightforward. Just a little bit of, I'm going to be coming at this from the perspective of the interviewer, and some ideology that I've employed over the years of interviewing people. I've only interviewed probably half a dozen people at this point. I mean, it's not a ton. But this is coming from the perspective of this is when I worked in field services, so this is going to be your tier 1 through 3 level technician. That's going to be the one being interviewed, and coming at it from a practical standpoint of looking for a candidate that is a good fit for the team from a culture standpoint. Not super heavy on that, but mostly a good fit from a practical problem solving standpoint. One of the things that I told my boss at the time, before, several times before most of these interviews, was as far as what I was looking for. So because he was handling the sorting through resumes and finding the candidates to interview and asking for some of my input. And the thing I always told them was, I am far more concerned and much more looking for a person's um problem solving and troubleshooting ability as opposed to their technical knowledge. For what we normally do and for that level of stuff that our company does, I can teach them what they need to know. I can, that will be covered in on the job training and just covered over time, and they can work into the technical things they need to know. Um, that is going to be a much easier process and a much more effective process if a person could come in with just natural troubleshooting and problem solving abilities, or just having a lot of good experience with problem solving and troubleshooting.
So what you're
So,
saying is that you're prizing individuals and interactions over processes and tools.
because I can teach them the processes and tools after the fact. It's not necessarily okay. Look, I
That
need
sounds
you.
pretty agile of you.
Uh-huh. But anyway, so that's the perspective I'm coming at when I'm going over these questions. And the first one I'm going to bring up is one that for any of you listening, you have any knowledge or familiarity with the current IT space, just the way things work in this day and age, this is going to confuse you a little bit because this is a wildly antiquated and out of date example of a system that operates. And it was that way when I was asking it in interviews as well.
It's not outdated, it's retro.
It's very retro. But I left it in. I thought it was ridiculous at the time. I think it's ridiculous now that we didn't update our interview questions and processes to exclude stuff like this. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, no, I'm going to leave this in because this is what I used as my the throw people off their game question, and get let's see who you really are and the way you really think through a problem. And I would say it was fairly successful. The times that I used it. So here we go. This is a scenario and then answer format question. So I'm giving the scenario to an interviewee. A computer uses a remote KVM to connect to the monitor and keyboard in an insecure area. So this would be, for instance, in a lobby of like a hotel or something, where you have a terminal, you have the peripherals, the monitor, the keyboard, and the mouse, the things you interact with the computer with, and the computer tower is in a secured area on the other side of the wall. The the monitor, and this is worded poorly in the way we have it worded, but anyway, the monitor is displaying a black screen. How do you diagnose what is causing this problem? So that's the scenario. That's all the scenario is. It's all you get as the interviewee is there is the things you interact with, monitor, keyboard, mouse. They're on one side of a wall, and the computer itself is on the other side of the wall, and the monitor is showing nothing. What do you do? And so the answers to this are basically the KVM is a two-part, a transmitter connected to the tower and a receiver connected to the monitor, keyboard, and mouse. The two parts are joined with a standard Cat5e internet cable. I think the way that this question is supposed to work is if they get stumped, then you can give them that piece of information to help it along. But then the answer is the fault is due to a faulty cable between the tower and the KVM. The cable is obviously damaged. If the technician inspects it, locating is a success in the scenario, blah, blah, blah. So, like I said, the reason that I left this in, this is not a thing. More often, it's probably still out in the wild somewhere. I'm not going to say it's not, but more often than not, it's not out in the wild. We have kiosks now. We have there's other technologies that have supplanted this. But for a young tech, for someone who isn't from this era, that this was a thing, it forces you to think. It forces you to wait a minute. That's not how. Wait, it stops that. It resets that OODA loop of thing, and you having to start over and start from scratch and think through each piece and how the pieces work to get to what could be the problem. And out of the people, again, like half a dozen people I asked this question to, I think only two of them, if I'm remembering correctly, actually either got to the conclusion correctly and talked through the process, or got really close. One of them may have gotten really close, and I kind of may just had to nudge a little bit, but they were getting there.
Yeah.
But it's just that fundamentals. It's that, can you hear a situation that is totally foreign to you, but somewhat familiar at the same time, and break it down to its individual pieces of, okay, this is old and I'm not familiar with it, but I heard computer, I heard monitor, mouse, and keyboard, and I heard that they are separate. And I know that those things have to be connected somehow. So where do I start? I know how a monitor interacts with a computer to show an image. How do I? Okay, so if it's not showing an image, I've gotten answers like, okay, well, I've made sure that the monitor is powered on. Okay, cool. That's a good first step. It is powered on, but the screen's still black. Okay, cool. So I turned it off and turned it back on again. Okay, fair. That's fine. What happened? Nothing happened. Okay, well, if it's not getting it, if it's a black image, like the backlight's on and it's black, but it's on, then that means it's not getting a video signal. Therefore, there's a problem with either the connection of the cable or the cable itself. And that's what leads you to. So anyway, always really liked that question in a quirky kind of way,
Yeah.
because it's a really, I think it's silly that it used to be a relevant question
Mhm.
of just like a normal standard relevant question, but I think over time, to me, it became a more abstract exercise in breaking things down to the absolute basics of problem solving. And I absolutely had mentioned those, had those two honorable mentions. Most of the other people got stumped after like 5 seconds, and there's like, I don't really know what to do. Like, I had
Well,
to
I think
explain to them what a KVM was. I
yeah.
had to explain, I had to do a lot of giving them a lot more information before they could even get halfway to the right answer.
Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but the basic gist of this is that you kind of weed out the people that stop at the turn it off, turn it
Yep.
on again, and like unplug the monitor, plug
Yeah.
it back in.
Because it also,
Because then you get to the point where it's like, okay, now we need to, even if you don't know what a KVM or anything, because this was kind of, well, when you asked this the first time, it kind of stumped me a little bit too. But when you really boil it down to it, then the next step is, okay, well, now we need to start tracing cables.
Yep.
See where everything leads.
yeah, and then and of course, in the format of the interview and the way that the interaction is between the interviewer and the interviewee, they would be open to asking me questions.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, the way that I would grade it, if you got an A plus, you would get an A plus by asking the specific question. Well, is the cable connecting the two KVMs, or even is the cable connecting the monitor and the computer broken, or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
That would be like, yep, ding, you got it. That would be the qualification for me for like, you got the right answer. And of course, the just judging wise, the faster you got there, the higher score I would give you in my head, in general. But yeah, but that just lended itself to, I've always kept that in the back of my mind of like, just a good, like, get back to basics. I want to know how you operate, because it's also I feel like it can also be a judge of how you operate under pressure. Going back to the example of it being like a young tech, if you put yourself in that mindset of, say, this is your first tech job that you're interviewing for, you're nervous going in, you don't have a lot of interviewing experience, you're in the dark, you don't know, you've watched YouTube videos on what kind of standard interview questions are and what
Mhm.
you think you know what to expect. You get that question thrown out to you, and you have no idea what any of that. I mean, that immediately puts somebody in
That's a
not
good one
panic
to,
mode,
yeah.
but it resets that mental, flips that mental switch of deer in headlights.
Yeah.
It's just, oh crap, never heard of this. I have no idea what to do. And that's what I want. That's
separate
the
the-
position that I want to put somebody in, so that they have to go back to instinct, and they have to go to that part of their brain that is, things that are not learned, that they're just inherent. And I want to see that. I
Yeah.
want to see what you do in that situation, because again, like with what we do, we're also client facing. We're in person, and you're gonna run into those situations where you're gonna have client breathing over your shoulder while you're trying to fix stuff, because that's what people do, unfortunately. And you've got to keep your composure. You've got to be professional. You've got to stay calm. The calmer you are, the calmer they are. It plays to, in a way, it plays to all of those things all at once in a very simple question, and that's why I've always liked
I
that
think
one.
that's kind of the theme that a lot of our questions have, is that how can we weed out the people that have just prepared for the interview versus the
Mhm.
people that are genuinely skilled in
Yeah.
what they're talking
It,
about.
Yeah.
it's to cut out the regurgitative responses.
Yeah.
Is that, look, I understand there's standard interview questions of like, tell me about yourself, what do you do on the weekends, what are your hobbies, things of that nature. It's like, yeah, again, that's part of the small talk kind of culture fit subsection there. But when we're looking at an actual like prospect legitimately here, I am going at this from a more of a, well, I'll just say my philosophy is like, I'm looking at you from a culture fit, the relative skill set for the role, and then the mindset towards the role. Those are the three factors that I need to know. It's like, cool. When I'm interviewing you under at least my team or positions that I've interviewed in the past, I can weed out really quick if you have the technical skills or not. That you can't feed me a BS line and me not know, okay, that's BS, or you actually know what you're talking about. So that's really easy, yes or no. What is much harder is, if I hire this person, are they going to be in direct conflict with the rest of the culture that we have on that team? Are they going to bring morale down? Are they going to cause strife? Are they going to cause any roadblocks or issues in that team that is going to ultimately make us less efficient, less effective, and just really kind of frustrate my guys that in reality, why would I bring someone in that's going to cause any of that?
Well,
Now,
and that leads me into my other two questions that I have here are they're linked to each other. It's similar principle for both. They're just there's a slight difference between the two. So the second question that I have would be uh, what cloud what cloud platforms are you familiar with? What cloud platforms do you prefer? And would you direct clients to those platforms over others based on your preference? And I'll go ahead and say question three, because again, it's very similar. What enterprise platforms are you familiar with? What enterprise platforms do you prefer? And would you direct clients to those platforms over others based on your preferences? Um, these would be, in my mind, these are very, very, very loaded questions, intentionally loaded questions. And what I would, I'll preface this by saying I've never asked these questions in an interview. This was more so in preparation for this episode. But I would absolutely want to include this in a future interview if I ever get to do that again. Because what this to me speaks to is determining a candidate's flexibility, as well as gauging what to expect when it comes to their client interactions. Because if you've been listening to this show for any amount of time, you know that Jonathan is very opinionated about some things,
never. I
that
don't know what you're talking
Matthew
about.
is very opinionated about very specific things. I'm opinionated about some specific things.
Amen.
Ian is very opinionated about Excel and other things.
Access. You can't forget access.
And Nathan's fairly broad, but he's also opinionated about some things.
Nathan's more selective of when he shares his opinions. That's the difference.
That's a fair point. But nonetheless, basically, we're all opinionated, like highly opinionated about some very specific things, and that's human nature. That's
Don't
how a
sugarcoat
lot
it.
of people
highly
are.
opinionated is
Now-
the baseline for us.
The term that
My
I used
opinion
here,
on access is not an opinion. It is a
dang,
fact.
I forgot access. Yeah, that one too. But the key word here to me is flexibility. One thing that I would also say about everybody at this table is that while opinionated, they're also very flexible and understanding
Mhm.
that that is not everybody else's opinion or preference, and they can work with that. I've met several people in my career that I would not put in that category. And I feel like that, as far as like talking about culture and general, uh, you know, uh, company efficiency and client relationships, that is wildly detrimental.
Mhm.
Because what I would be trying to kind of coerce out of somebody with these questions is, are you a, uh, I guess like for the cloud example, we're an Azure shop. We're a Microsoft shop as far as cloud things are concerned. This person that we're interviewing, are they a big old massive Google Workspace fanboy, and are you going to bring that opinion into project planning meetings and project update meetings with the client? And if a client's saying, I don't like or I don't like this thing about this part of the project because of this reason, and instead of working within the scope of the project and the product that we are working with, you're just going to go in immediately and use that as an opportunity to try and sell them on something else
Mhm.
that is not a product that we either offer or have experience with, and throw a wrench in the whole thing and turn the client, are you going to cause chaos because of your preferences, or are you just a normal person and you have preferences, but you understand, but you can be flexible with
Mhm.
other things?
I have an example for that.
Okay.
Matthew is the technician. The client is complaining about Windows.
Mhm.
Matthew beats Linux over the head.
Yes.
Okay, so here's where
Yes,
here's
that.
where I dunk on Windows all the time. Like if anybody's listened to more than one episode, I do dunk on Windows all the time. But the difference is that I do use Windows at my day job. So an equal amount of time I do spend in Windows, and I do software development. Now, granted, the software development that I do is not Windows specific, and I am hoping to move away from Windows eventually. But my day-to-day job, I still interact with Windows on a regular basis at a relatively deep level. It's not just
But do you lecture your coworkers and end users about using Windows on a day-to-day
well. So
basis?
we talked to
and
I
try
talked to my
preach to
boss
them
quite
the
a
word
bit.
of
Okay,
Linux?
hold on. I also want to make it incredibly clear to everyone in this room and anyone listening, if your day-to-day conversations are going about your opinions on what OS to run, my God, you need to get a new hobby, something else. There's other things outside of this realm of what your mind wants
You
to
need to go
discuss
touch
right
grass.
now. Exactly. There are better, more beautiful
Maybe
things out
climb a
there
hill.
than what OS do I prefer.
Yeah. But that's the spirit of this, and it again goes back to like just with my experiences so far and what I've been involved with, just by the nature of what I'm doing. Like I said, I'm far more concerned, and I much more prioritize a a person for who they are and not what they know, because I recognize, I mean, people, if you are a competent individual that has some natural problem solving skills,
Mhm.
you can learn anything you need to learn. You can, I mean, that is a much easier person to work with on a day-to-day basis and to teach things.
Mhm.
And so I don't worry about that. It's like, I know that we can deal with that. That's cool. We can handle that later on. I need to find these core components, build this foundation. Having a good foundation in this regard, I think is more important on the lower levels, and the tier 1 to 3, like your early days, your foundational years of your career. That's far more important than what you know, and it becomes more and more important as you go along what you know,
Yeah.
and the factual knowledge that you have as you move up and specialize and so on and so forth. But yeah, at that base level, like, you need to have good solid problem solving skills, and you need to be flexible.
Well, to give it like a short analogy, this is kind of like the difference between a software engineer and a computer scientist,
Yep.
right? So where a software engineer, typically you've learned a programming language, you've learned a set of tools, you have a relatively narrow skill set tailored to a specific thing. On the operating system side, you're like a Windows guy. That's what you know. So you're a little pigeonholed on what you can do there. Now, if you've taken a step back on the computer scientist side of things, where you've learned some of the abstract pieces of how the things work, you're not tied down to just you've learned a specific tool, but you've learned how these kinds of tools work. Then you're a lot more valuable because you have those a skill that is transferable to other things. You're not tied down to just a specific piece of technology. I think that's what you're saying. And
Yeah.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. That's much more beneficial.
But that's it for me. That's questions that I had. So I will turn it over to the next interviewer.
Well,
The
thank you,
CFO, the CTO, the
the
CEO,
president.
yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. I
The man in the
appreciate
hole.
I appreciate your questions that you presented to our current prospect here. Unfortunately, they did have to leave, but once
I
again,
didn't even get to ask them.
well, again, they expected this to be a paid internship,
I
not
didn't
a
get to see
free.
the
We
panic in their eyes.
but we're paying them with experience. That's the thing.
How many apples can they buy with the experience that they gain?
No apples because we don't like Apple here. Simple.
Eh,
And okay, so going back to like
There used
mindful.
to be 2 apples on the table. Now we're down to 1.
Yep.
Anyway, going back to what I brought up earlier is like my philosophy during the interview process is now that I'm mostly interviewing for specialized roles, not just for my team. I've done it for administration and other like kind of like security roles, like not for like IT security. These are like on-site security officers, things of that nature that I've had to sit in and ask questions and help vet a prospect. These are a couple of things that it's like when I look at you, I can sit here all day and ask you technical questions or things pertinent to the role that I can vet pretty quickly. Does this guy know what they're talking about? Are they able to speak coherently to what the role is going to be required of them? Things of that nature. So, what I'm more interested in is getting to know the person who's going to fill that role rather than can you actually take on the responsibilities for that role? And so, one of the questions I always love to ask to anyone I interview is one that usually they get a little blindsided on, just similar to like your first question, Stephen, is honestly, how do you react or respond to negative feedback? Like when you put in all this effort, you did the work according to your best practices, and someone else is coming in here and questioning your efforts and provided you feedback saying, well, they didn't do it to their expectations, you did it to your expectations. How do you respond?
Depends on if this is an in-person meeting or an email.
I
I was
cry.
gonna ask a similar question.
Yeah, and honestly, it's both. Is when you get that level of feedback, how would you actually respond to it?
Do I have the opportunity to slam my head on the desk and like vent my frustration and then respond, or do I have to like keep myself composed
During
and respond?
You're just answering the question. I mean,
you're answering the question,
be truthful.
and that's the thing is like, are you doing it in anger? Are you attacking that individual, or are you actually looking at the feedback that you got and trying to analyze it and going, did I mess up? Did I do something wrong? Or are their expectations wildly out of range of what was actually expected for me to do? Look at it that way as to did I actually mess up? Or was there just a breakdown somewhere in this process that, hey, this needs to get addressed, this needs to get fixed? Because those two things are incredibly important of if you messed up, awesome. How do you respond to when you get called out because you messed up? Because that's going to happen.
Actually, I have an example of this. We had a client that I was working on a project, and we got negative feedback saying that we did not accomplish the goals that were set forth by them, and they were right. But the reason for that, and again, we got that negative feedback. My manager came to me and said, "Hey, what happened here?" And I said, "This is what happened. This and this is how we responded to it. We were given a task. We were given a scope. We met that scope. Scope changed, and um, the client says that their needs changed. We still had time left in the contract, so we went ahead and moved forward with it. Um, Unfortunately, scope continued to change, and we continued to get negative feedback after getting the client's approval. And eventually, time just ran out. So that negative feedback that we just got, um, yeah, it is truthful, but it's we did everything in our power to meet their needs. They were just still unhappy.
Which again, that is important information to bring up with it, and that's the type of philosophy that I'm wanting to try to understand is when situations like that happen, how are you going to react? Because if you're going to your first reaction is immediately just to lash out, that's going to be a pretty big problem, and you're going to be obviously a potential detriment to the team. Similarly, of why I love asking this question, which is how would you explain to someone your role who has no experience in your field, i.e., how would you explain your job to your grandparents? And the reason why I love asking this question is it boils down that individual, like what they think their role to the most important key parts. So when they answer that, that is usually telling me what do they find the most important things that they're going to be doing if they bring on this role.
Matthew and I were actually having a similar conversation on the way over here. We were talking about Elon Musk's little um, uh, request of 5 points that as to basically why you should keep your job. What
That
did
was
you?
really early on in the car ride. I was like, hold on a second. What were we talking about?
Yeah, but because it's a very similar question. It's basically saying, what is your job?
Yeah.
What give me 5 points to do to tell me what your job is. And I said to Matthew, that really separates the people that actually understand what their job is versus the people that just know what their title is.
Exactly. And that's where it's like, again, anyone can read a title and might be able to pick out what that means, but it's completely different if, say, like you ask me what my job actually is. I will tell you this. My job is to lead a team in implementing, deployment, and supporting a business's migration to a cloud infrastructure and ensuring a stable and most reliable solution they can that provides them, again, buzzword, the most agile platform they can have for their business.
Nigel?
Agile.
There you go.
Don't worry
Agile.
about that.
Who's Nigel?
Thornberry.
I
He's a
will
really cool
say-
dude. Has a really nice mustache, kind of a tall head, a little plump on the bottom, but he's a nice guy.
He was the would-be intern.
I will say congratulations. You would have passed Elon Musk's 5 points because you could have made 5 sentences out of that.
Yeah, it's like it's always because I get that question asked a lot. Like if I told people, yeah, I'm a cloud engineer. What does that mean? I am in charge of
Do you control the weather?
no, and that I've gotten that a couple of times. It's like no. So what my role
Are you the one
is?
putting the chemtrails?
No, that's the government. No,
DARPA.
my job is I take every like a business's on-prem infrastructure. That means like their email, their files, everything that's important to them IT wise, and I put that in an offsite location with a hosting provider, whether that be Microsoft, AWS, Google, things of that nature. That's how I explain it. Is like, look, all the stuff that you interact with daily on your computer, it is my job to take that and put it somewhere else. That's it.
That
And-
sounds like stealing.
A little bit. But no, and
Organized stealing.
but it's one of those. It's like, look, if you're gonna take on like these types of roles, at least on my team, these are very hyper specialized. You need to understand what that actually means, and I want you to boil down what you think are the most key important parts, because that's where I know your mindset is going to be focusing on that coming in. And the other one is what key factor or factors provides you the most motivation to provide your highest level of work? Meaning, what can we do and provide for you that we get the highest output of work from you? Like your absolute best. What is your dream?
Money.
Well, that is some. Others is they just want support. They just want to be on a team that they know if a decision has to be made or if they are literally just in a situation that they can't figure this out by themselves, they need someone to lean onto. That's something that I want to know right ahead of time. Because again, when you're interviewing the prospect, if it's all money motivated, cool. We usually have a budget and a range as to what we can hire you on. As long as that's within that range, we can be flexible with you. But if you're wanting that support, if you're wanting these types of tools, if you're wanting this type of culture or something from the organization that either we can't offer or 100% we can accommodate, we need to know that coming in for this prospect to ensure, hey, we reached out to HR, we reached out to the department heads. This is an expectation and feedback that we got from this prospect that they are wanting fulfilled. Can we do that or can we not? Because that's incredibly important for everyone part of that process to know this is an expectation. This is something that we know they want. If we can't fulfill that, cool. They're no longer a prospect. We let them know saying, hey, we appreciate your time. We'll get back to you when we get back to them saying that you're no longer a candidate for us. We wish you best of luck on your next journey. And it's all right there. Or if they are, awesome. We can extend an offer to them and ensure that that expectation can be met. But those are just 3 very easy questions you can ask to see, can they fit our culture? Can they fit the expectations of the role? And do they even understand the role? And with that, I yield.
Makes sense.
Are you giving back some of everyone's time?
I will now give back my 5 minutes remaining to Matthew.
Okay. So I just have
Mr. Chairman.
I think
Mr.
we all
Chair.
have at least 3 questions. Ian's got like a wall, which is really cool, and I like a lot of these questions. So I'm gonna speed through mine so we can get to Ian's. Most mine are kind of like tailored towards if I was interviewing someone to either take on my role or take on a role like mine. So like the first one I have here is, how do you personally keep organized? And this one I may give like an example of, you have task A, B, and C. Here's what's going on with each different task. How do you prioritize those? How do you keep track of them? The idea here is that I want to gauge how well the interviewee stays on task, right? Because I think in the vast majority of cases, each of us has more than one thing going on at a time, right? So how do we stay focused, keep track of what we've done with each thing that we're working on? How do we keep the things moving? And how do we keep them all straight? I know Steven is of the opinion that sticky notes are the way, the truth, and the life. I'm more of the opinion that a bunch of different text files, like organized for each project.
So we compromise, and you use what used to be available in Windows is the built-in sticky notes
The
app.
Windows sticky notes? Yeah.
Exactly.
Hate those. Hate those so much. I've kind of morphed over time, and I think I've talked about this in a previous episode. Now, most of my stuff is like kept with the project itself. If that makes sense. So like if I'm working on a project, used to I had like a when I actually started keeping notes. I didn't start out keeping, but when I started taking notes, I had like a separate note that was like a personal note that here's what I'm doing with all this project. Now I've moved that stuff into the project itself so that everything is self-contained. So if somebody else comes behind me, they can see, hey, here's what was worked on, here's what's going on. It's rare, but
You mean thorough and robust
there.
documentation?
yes, comprehensive.
Comprehensive. Thank you.
Comprehensive. But I still deliver working software at the end of it too. So I am agile. Thank you. The next one I have is, how do you keep a team of people in the loop on a project? This is one that I've also like. My opinions have changed over time. I think that email is the worst way. Like the bigger the team gets, the bigger the loop of people you have, the worse email is. Because like the thing that always happens for me is that you send an email and then someone replies, and then someone replies to one further in the chain, and then everything just goes off the rails because people are just, they're going sequentially through their inbox, but they're not like taking an email thread as a whole, if that makes sense. They're responding to an email at a time. It's a mess. I hate it so much. But this is a thing. It's like, hey, how experienced are they? How have they hit this kind of situation before? Do they have their own like kind of best practices? There things that they lean towards? Are they an in-person meeting kind of thing? Like, let's get everybody together. Are they just a quick send out an email? Are they hey, let's set up a Teams group chat? Like what's their thought process on that? I think that one's also kind of near and dear to my heart. And I just any chance that I get, like Ian talks about me and Linux all the time, but honestly, I think the other thing that I would really like to be known for is dunking on email. Email is the devil. All right, and then the last one.
You've just been really vocal about Linux lately. If you be more vocal about email,
I've been
we can
vocal about
switch.
email since day one. Like if we have an AI
Hold on,
set up
hold on,
to
hold
like
on.
look up how much time I spend talking about email versus how much I spend talking about Linux, it's at least 50-50.
Okay, let's refocus now. What is your third question?
Okay, third question is, when gathering requirements for a project. Okay, I've interrupted everybody else, so like it's only fair that I was hoping somebody would interrupt me, pat it out a little bit. When gathering requirements for a project, how do you know when you have all the necessary information? This one is also relatively near and dear to my heart. Otherwise I wouldn't have put it on there. But this one is to gauge how flexible / knowledgeable / honest an interviewee is. In my opinion, especially in software development, there isn't really a point like on the front end where you've hit, hey, this is it. We have all the requirements, right? Because as we talked about in a previous episode, sometimes most of the time, the users are unreliable. They don't really know what the requirements are. They don't know what they need.
True story.
And it's your job to drag that out of them however you need to. And 9 times out of 10, they're not going to know everything, and you're not going to know everything until you get into the thick of it. And this is where I think Agile plays out really nicely. The iterative process, you can start something, you can slowly build on top of it, and as the user realizes, or the stakeholder, or whatever you want to call them, realizes that, hey, I actually need something a little different or a lot different, you're not locked in. You didn't have this, this is the plan, this is the process, we're sticking with this, and if it sucks for them, too bad, this is what they signed off on. This is where that flexibility plays for both of us, where they are guaranteed to get something that will actually work for them, and I am guaranteed to not have to waste too much time tweaking things because we know that things aren't going to line up the whole way. So, like, for example, I just had a project. I'm going to just move my drink to the side real quick because I'm waving my hands and I might spill it everywhere. But we've got an audience today.
Focus.
First live episode, everybody.
Okay.
An audience of one.
There's no camera here, sadly. We should have had a camera here on the April Fool's one. That would have been hilarious.
John,
Oh, the
Hey,
table
he
is
dropped it.
tilting.
I mean, this is his house and his table, so if he breaks it, it's on him.
Well, as long as he doesn't send our laptops with it, that'd be nice. Or the water.
Don't
Or
worry about
the
that.
other water.
Continue.
Is that a water or an energy
I
drink?
apologize for that. I saw something moving.
Yeah, it's going
Good
to be
job.
in one of our laptops. Don't worry about it.
Actually,
Hopefully-
it might be in Matthew's body armor.
No, it had a cap on it.
His literal body armor, not the brand.
Yeah, I'm wearing Kevlar here.
Anyway.
let me tell you, listeners. Okay, when the microphones aren't on, like when the microphones are on, it gets heated. When the microphones go off, it gets even more heated. I think everybody can agree with that. Okay, but anyway, the gathering the requirements. Where was I? That was one heck of a derail.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, requirements. The
Being flexible
being flexible. Like how this is another thing of like, do they have experience working on and managing a project? Because one of the things that I am is I'm a programmer analyst. So part of my job is programming software, and obviously that's my favorite. I love working on those things. I love that more than working with the people. But whether I like it or not, working with the people is half the job. The analyst side of things comes in when we are looking at either an existing situation or a new problem that we're trying to solve, and figuring out the best way of doing it, figuring out all the moving pieces. What's the solution? How do we work on this? How do we make it better for the end user? So does the interviewee have experience in this? What have they seen? What are they looking like? Oh yeah, where I was going with that. The example that I had, this changed like 20 times. So I was working on a project of this last 6 months. I think I mentioned this in a previous episode. The project started and it was, hey, here's what we have. This is half my job is taking a Word doc and turning it into like an actual form with a workflow behind it and a process that's relatively locked in so that we make sure that all our T's are crossed and our I's are dotted. Like that's the thing. Well, it started out, I was sent, here's a spreadsheet with the different numbers and formulas of how we calculate things. Here's a Word doc that we use that this is what collates the information at the end of the thing. What can we do to like build a process around this, right? And there was some terminology that I was unfamiliar with, so we had a sit-down meeting. We went through, okay, here's what this is, here's what they're looking for. Okay, great, we can do that. Like nothing that they were asking for was, out of left field or anything. And they were super happy about that because my favorite part is when people come in and they're like, hey, I don't know if we can do this, and it's fair. Like they're like, I don't know if we can do this, but answer's always no unless you ask. Let me ask. And they think that this is something that could be like,
Those are some of the best clients.
yeah, they're like, I really don't, and it's okay if we can't do this, but is this something we can do? And then we're just sitting there like, we can have this done in an afternoon, like easy. Next, what else do you want? Like the way their faces light up, that's my favorite part. So this is one of those situations where I was like, yeah, we can do all these things and more. So we'll work on this. And then over the last 6 months, I didn't have to completely rewrite the whole thing, but there were a few pieces here and there that without going into too much detail, there were a few pieces here and there that I did have to rework quite a bit because it was like, okay, like for example, there was a few fields on the form where it was a integer, so a whole number. Some mathematician's gonna be like, that's not the same thing. It was
a prime number.
it was a no decimal points after the number, right? And that's a different thing. Like Ian can talk about this in terms of databases. Those are two different things: a decimal number and an integer number, right? Like they're he's nodding his head. Thank you. This is the only time Ian will ever agree with me on the show. There's
not true.
there's a big difference, right? So I had these things set up to be an integer, not to have the decimal, like be a decimal number, have the floating point numbers afterwards. And then stakeholder comes back and is like, hey, we actually want to turn this set of integers into decimals. I was like, okay, I did that. And I did a bit of a band-aid. And I was like, okay, we got it. We're good. And then they come back again and they're like, hey, we actually also want to add these ones. And so then it was like, that one kind of threw me a little bit for a loop. But having the flexibility was, hey, I was able to respond to this and say, yes, I can do that. I went and reworked. On their end, it's a very simple change. Like, we just want the decimal point and the extra numbers. Can you do that? On my end, took a little bit of tweaking. And thankfully, this was like before production, so I didn't have to blow up the database and rework a bunch of things. So that was nice. But how do they handle these situations? And I think one of the things that I think I can speak for everybody, if you as an interviewee have examples, those are worth their weight in gold. Like, give us examples of things that you have actually done, seen, had happen. Like, those are incredible. And that's what, for each of my things here, that's really what I would be looking for. Not just the thought process, but also how they've done things before, I think, and the things that they've learned from those situations. Anyway, I'll shut up now. It's Ian's turn.
So my questions are more direct. They're mostly not talking about soft skills. They're much more hard skills. Because I am a data analyst, I focus these pretty heavily, like almost solely on questions. Actually, not almost solely on questions a data analyst might get. I have seven different subjects, 2 questions for each of them. So if anybody can do basic math, that's 14 different questions. We will probably not get to all of them. So
You get to pick 3.
yeah,
I will say this: we will not get to all of them.
yeah, no, we'll pick and choose here. But the purpose behind these questions is
I don't see any access questions here.
exactly a data analyst is kind of like your jack of all trades in the data field. You're a little bit of an engineer. You're a little bit of a database warehouse manager. You're a little bit of a visualization expert. You're a little bit of a data scientist. Everything kind of conglomerates at you, and then goes out into the more specified fields. So with that being said, of these 7 subjects, I would expect anybody to interviewing for a data analyst position to have expertise in at least 4 of them. So any of these questions, I would expect the interviewee to be able to answer. But we'll just start with some SQL, because pretty much any analyst worth their salt is gonna be able to know and write SQL pretty well. But more particularly, this particular question also shows not only the candidate's knowledge of SQL, but their thought process behind SQL. Because, like any coding language, there are 100 different ways you could do this. The question is, how do you find duplicate rows? This is, at first glance, a very, very simple question.
Can I answer it?
Go.
Okay, so here's what I would do. I do most of my database access in Visual Studio Code. So Control-Alt-B opens up Copilot, and then I ask Copilot the question.
Can I answer the question?
Go for it.
I throw everything into Excel. I hit Control F. I then highlight all my fields. I then hit Find All, and then usually it brings up the duplicate.
This is a SQL specific question.
So very simple.
Not use SQL.
Yeah, very very simple. You delete the database. There's no more duplicates.
No,
Congratulations,
You could
you are
still
correct.
you could still do your thing. You just export the database
Yes.
as a CSV.
As a CSV, and then you do it that
Open it
way.
up in Excel. See, he's got it. He's
You,
got it.
you can't export it as a CSV.
No,
through
you-
I guess
SQL.
it depends on the database you're using. So we
that,
use
and then you have to do a report request to be able to do that. Anyways.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Anyways, the example that I have written out is a SQL group by state, a select and group by statement.
this is definitely the simplest, most straightforward answer.
Yeah, using a having clause. For anyone out there that doesn't know what I just said, it's basically you select a couple things, you count the number of rows you have, you select the columns from a table, then you group your table by your columns, and then you have a third column that gets you the count of those rows, and the having statement will only return the rows that have more than greater than count of 1.
Mm-hmm.
That is the simplest and most straightforward answer. I would expect if I have 5 candidates, I am going to get 5 very different answers here, and probably not one of them are going to be that.
But that's also a good example of like, what's their experience? Did they prep for this? Is one that I would think would be a good one to weed out who's prepped for it, right? Because you can ahead of time you can ask AI like, hey, answer this question, right? So you can kind of weed out who's asked Copilot, Grok, GPT, whatever. But you can also kind of see who's a little bit more in the weeds.
That is actually a great point, because if I do get the same answer 5 times, I know what's just happened.
Yeah. I like that question.
Yeah. The other one that I have on here is another one that would be pretty standard in an interview, and that is how would you optimize a slow running query? There are, again, 100 different ways that you can do this, but it is something that shows a thought process and knowledge of the subject. I'll move on to the visualization softwares. I chose Power BI, I only used Power BI and Tableau here because they're the two main ones in the industry. And if you know,
what about Access?
it's not a visualization software.
it's not.
Shows me the
It's not.
fields.
No.
No, but it's technically a database hosting software, but you should use it for that either.
Anyways, I'm only actually no. I'm gonna do. I'm only gonna do one question from the 4, and I'm gonna do a Power BI question because it's a little more fun. What is the difference between a calculated column and measures in DAX? For those of you that don't know, DAX is a Microsoft specific coding language. It's really not that much different than something like SQL. In fact, it's more of just an offshoot of SQL. But it's that's not the point of the question. The point of the question is to once again find knowledge of the subject, and not just knowledge of the subject, but do you actually understand how the software is running? And if you know how it's running, you know how to troubleshoot. The answer to this question is calculated columns are calculated and computed row by row. So they are, as soon as the dashboard is loaded up, or and if you're using an extract, as soon as the query is ran, it is calculating it row by row at the time of the query. Or if you're using a live connection, it's always calculating it so that it's just constantly recalculating. Measures, on the other hand, are calculated on the fly and are your front-facing measures. So if anytime you're looking at a let's say you're looking at a car website, a car dealer's website, and they've got a live number up there about how many cars that they've sold. They are using something like a measure to show that number. That number is being calculated on the fly. It's the same thing with these measures. These measures are being calculated during a phase that's between that initial query and the user. The user's what am I trying to say?
Interaction. With it.
Interaction. That's the word. Interaction with the dashboard, because those because they can change depending on how the user is actually using the dashboard. Yeah, it's a fun. It's
That's a good technical question. Too.
Yeah, and-
like especially if you're like a Power BI shop.
Mhm.
I
And it's kind of it seems like a multifunction question
Yeah.
too, because
Mhm.
it's like you said, it's functional, factual knowledge. You got to know that to answer it in the way you want it answered.
it's more
But
than
also,
just
it speaks to a thought process at the same time.
Yeah,
it
it's-
speaks to abstract thought at the same time.
it's more than just like a trivia question, because there's
Yeah.
actual weight
Not
to
a
the
multiple
differences
choice.
between those.
Yeah.
And there's what I really like about it is there's actually the hidden question of, do you understand the order of operations of the software?
Mhm.
And then that further goes into troubleshooting. So moving on, I chose Python because it is we're moving on into software questions here, or not software. Oh my gosh, coding languages here. But
This is technically your fourth question.
anyways,
I'm actually curious on several of these, so I'm to hear this.
I specifically chose Python just because it is so widely used, and it is for a data analyst specifically. It will be more used than something like R. That's the letter R, and that is a coding language for those of you who are not aware.
It's for pirates.
It is for pirates, black hats, and skull. Anyways, R is used more for true data science than it is what a typical data analyst for. C, within Python, there are libraries that you can use, and some of the most used one of the most used ones is pandas. Within pandas, there are a plethora of extremely powerful functions that will reduce query times, and just make your code look a lot cleaner. But this question goes into a deeper knowledge of understanding how to find missing data, and it's specifically, how do you handle missing values in a data set using pandas? So this is a scenario where you have a table and you know that there are some fields that have been nulled out for one reason or another, and maybe they're not supposed to be. So you're wanting to go into the table, find them, and be able to trace those null fields back to the source to find out if something in the query is going wrong, or if there's something at the source that's going wrong. The three easiest ways to do this would be using the is null function, drop in a function, or fill in a function. To find using the is null function will literally return anything that is null. If you have a column, it'll search that entire. Or you call a column, it'll search the entire column. If it finds a null, it'll just return it. Return it on the not exporting the returning table with your query. So you can do that with just one column at a time, or you can set it up to where it'll return all null fields, or all null rows with a null field in the columns that you are needing to identify. The drop in a function, here we go, will remove. You can use that to remove any and all rows that have data in it, which would only leave rows with null values left. So that's a fun little like backwards way of doing it, if you will. But it works. And then the last one, fill in a. This one is one I would consider a more advanced one because most people would choose one of the other two well before this one. This one just automatically imputes missing values. So you're going to go in and it's getting late and my definitions have failed me.
Fair.
Late in the morning.
Yeah, it's late in the morning. I have not had my coffee yet.
The afternoon slump is about to hit.
You're gonna find your no value with. The next Python question, is, oh no, what happened here?
See, I was going to ask about this one because there's it looks like we missed a key part of the interview question, and I think now's a good time to note that if the question isn't great, I don't think that's necessarily, or if the question is missing a critical piece, I'm not sure it's fair to blame the interviewee of that.
No,
No.
this is testing their ability
We talked
to
about this
read
last
your
episode.
mind.
It is
and-
always ops, it's level 1. It's always their fault. It's always the interviewer's
Yep.
fault or
No.
interviewee's fault.
I think I know what happened here. Whenever I was copying stuff over, I don't think I got a full copy of it.
Well, listen,
That's
the optics on this interview now have changed into a negative pattern, and I need you to go ahead and pull this to a upward draft to ensure that this interviewee still wants this role after you're completed.
Oh no problem. I've already fixed it. Explain the difference between NumPy arrays and standard Python array.
Can I answer this one?
Go for it.
One's from a library and one is not.
That is technically
Public or
correct.
private?
How does I'm blanking on it. How does Python do namespaces? Is it just modules or is it?
I mean, you can use modules, but
I'll have to look that up. I'm kind of. It's
It's-
been a long time since I've touched Python.
Same. I've been in the depths of PowerShell for too long to remember how Python did it.
no, you can use modules, but it's back up a little bit. What exactly do you mean by namespace?
So how do you separate out chunks of code? You've got your functions, and you got functions can be in classes, and then classes can be in modules. Can modules be separated out? Is the module like?
I would say that the module goes into the library.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say I wouldn't separate it further. I think it can be.
Yeah.
But I have never dealt with that directly. I wouldn't want to. That just sounds like it would be very clunky and hard to work with and full of bugs.
Would that basically be for somebody who has no idea what half of what was just said? Would that basically be the equivalent of pushing Python beyond what it's really good for?
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say it's pushing it beyond what it's good for. It's just not.
But it could be Python has a different name for it that I just don't remember.
Yeah, basically, it would be trying to It's that what he's describing would be trying to bake a cake for like a single cake for a small family birthday, using a commercial kitchen.
I'm not. It's not. That wasn't my intention, but
Basically, you're just not using the tool.
so you can have multiple classes in a file, right?
Mhm.
Okay, and then I just need to look up the syntax, but the file can also the whole file can be a module. Is that correct?
The module would have multiple files within
Okay, then I just don't understand the structure of a Python project. I need to look that up.
it. Anyways,
Then you're not a fit for this role. Have a nice day.
We made it how long into this episode before somebody said that?
to
At least
just-
I'm trying to understand, Steven. I thought that was the whole point.
Still
to
unacceptable.
just give the quick answer here.
This isn't like, a TED talk try to like learn. This is you were trying to get hired for this role, and you absolutely bombed that section.
And
Well,
we
hey,
we wish
all
you well
know-
on your journey.
We all know I didn't use AI to prep for this interview.
No, you didn't.
You also didn't just write down the answers on your arm, where you constantly were like looking at it and hoping you don't sweat and accidentally rub it off.
So NumPy arrays are fixed multi-dimensional containers for numeric data with giving a better performance. A regular Python list, or another way to describe it is a standard Python array, are dynamic and support mixed types, but are slower for numerical operations. Basically, the difference is one is better for numbers. The NumPy arrays are specifically better for running purely numerical databases versus a list that may contain both
Numbers and words.
numbers and words.
yeah.
Yes.
So part of just as some like nerdy background information on this, part of the reason behind that is, if I understand it right, NumPy is mostly written in C. I'd have to look this up, but that would be my guess. Is that NumPy is mostly written in C. So they're using a lower level language to do these calculations, and then they've basically got a Python wrapper around it. So you've got the benefit of a very fast language that can do all these calculations, but you have a higher level, much more user-friendly language to interface with that. So you have, like, for the data engineers, they have a lot easier time. They don't have to deal with the nitty-gritty of the pointers, all that nonsense. And that's why it's faster, because the implementation is it's not just like the data structures are very similar, but the underlying code that does the processing is very different, if that makes sense. Because if most of Python is implemented in Python, or if like some of these things are implemented in Python, then it's going to be slower because it's an interpreted language versus a compiled language. And yeah, anyway, I remember reading about this before, of like some of the differences between why NumPy exists. Because it's not just a Python library, and a lot of the Python library, like the big ones, it's not just a Python library that's written in Python. It's a Python library written in C with Python on top of it, if that makes sense.
Pretty much its nomenclature is bolted on top.
One of my favorite Python libraries is SciPy, simply because of the name.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I would, okay, well that was the first interview of the night where I would categorically bomb in epic fashion.
I do have 3 more subjects. Do we want to just hit on one?
Nope.
Nope.
No,
Okay.
no, we.
If it's not Access, we don't want it.
It was Excel.
Let's do an
Okay,
Excel one.
hit the pivot table one.
Hit the pivot table.
Oh, okay.
All right. You 4. How do you use pivot tables for data analysis?
Simple. You don't.
Matthew?
I have absolutely this is one thing. Tell me what a pivot table is. I don't
You
use
go
Excel.
to the menu and you select pivot table, and you fill in some of the blanks in the wizard that pops up, and it makes a pretty graph.
What does a pivot table do for me?
You're not wrong.
Visual.
It's visualization. All it is
You're
visualization.
hired, Steven.
It makes pie charts and line graphs and
Welcome
stuff.
to data engineering.
Yeah.
John essentially said it.
Wait, so a pivot table is just like a data visualization
Yeah.
tool?
That
Wait,
that
not a tool. It is a wizard, because you can do the entire pivot table by hand if you want to, but the wizard will actually walk you through setting up the pivot table, pulling in where exactly you want that information to actually come from, how you want it visualized, or again, you can actually have it just auto-generate your visualization for you. And again, it'll give you like pie charts, bar charts. It can give you graphic breakdowns of exactly like, hey, if you're doing like finances, you can actually have a budgetary breakdown and visual representation of how successful or how terrible your organization was actually going. Because where Steven and I have interacted with it multiple times at least I have, is with financial firms and going with my Excel runs super slow, and I go look, they have like 17 different pivot tables, all pulling different financial information from different sheets all at the same time. And I'm like, yeah, it takes forever to compile. I'm like, I wonder why.
On an 8th gen processor.
No, it was way older than that. It's way older than that.
With 4
We're
gigs
looking
of
at
RAM.
Yeah, it was
Ivy
terrible.
Bridge, Sandy Bridge, at best.
Yeah.
The reason that pivot tables are looked on as a advanced Excel usage is because most people do not actually understand the data behind it, and the data,
Mhm.
and more specifically, the data structure behind it. They see the pivot, they go to the wizard, they start putting stuff in, and they're like, I could do this, la la la, and then they get their data, and they're like, this doesn't look like anything. Like, why are my sums like regressing instead of increasing? Like, what's going on here? And well, it's because your underlying data is bad. You've structured it in such a crap manner that you're not going to get any good insights out of it.
And on that excellent explanation on a tool that realistically everyone's probably going to use at some point.
Are we supposed to pivot away from this conversation?
I wanted to thank you again for coming in for your interview. You did adequately well. I feel that we got a lot out of this experience. I hope you did as well. And again, we wish you best in your journey, and we might be in touch. And with that, Steven's going to go ahead and walk you out and let you know how you did.
All right. Well, we appreciate you coming in today to the Hostility in the Morning interview for our internship spot.
Unpaid internship.
Is our unpaid internship spot that you will get valuable experience from if you're selected. Since you stayed this long, and we hope you liked the interview questions and such. We hope that you'll give us a positive review on Yelp. We really rely on that heavily. But you
Don't
can
forget
also
Glassdoor.
go in Glassdoor. We definitely would love a positive Glassdoor review. But you can also leave some feedback on X, tag us on X, Facebook, and Instagram, or you can just send it direct. If you have any direct feedback about the experience, you can send it to info@hostilityinthemorning.com. We have a podcast actually that we record. We upload every other Tuesday, really early in the morning, on Substack, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. I personally recommend YouTube. It's really cool. There's a cool little graphic that we do in the background. It's awesome. But yeah, we also have a website. It has all that stuff on it that you can go to. It's hostilityinthemorning.com. So, I hope you have a great day. And again, we wish you well on your journey. We may or may not be in touch with you. So, have a hostile.